Hello everyone, this is for part 2 from the video I promised you last week. And last week I showed it to you in the desktop mode, so it was landscape. But today I made it in mobile app form, and you use the same method for both. It's just that I decided to make it mobile friendly in case people wanted to check progress on the run. So I like the tall version for the phone because it can make the text a little bit easier to make larger. So I'll show you the app again here. This is the mobile version of what I showed you last week. Basically what it is showing is all of the requests for training. So what's happening here is people are facilitating trainer. So these are trainers that are submitting this form, and basically they're asking for funding. And there's a Teams instance where there are people there that will allocate funding for these courses, or they will indicate there is no budget. And so it's basically a voting system, even though I'm using approval cards with custom responses to handle this. To kind of give you some ideas of all the wonderful things you can do with custom responses. Also, I'm also addressing an issue where when you submit an approval and you ask to wait for the approvals to finish, it literally waits for them to finish before it tells you who's approved what. So this is a way of kind of seeing what's happening under the scenes while you're waiting for an approval. And I'll just quickly show you that. So when you're in Flow, I'm just going to go to my flows here, and I'm going to choose a flow. And you'll notice that this particular flow has at the bottom, it has, and we'll go through this flow one by one, but this action, wait for approval, is the one I'm talking about. When Flow gets to this action, what it does is it pauses, and all you see is that this is running. And once all the approvers respond, then the rest of the flow runs, and you can find out who approved and who didn't. This video is going to show you how you can see what's happening behind the scenes, even though you're waiting for an approval. So it'll give you an option, not required, but it's a nice option. And that was the purpose of my app, to actually be used to show what's happening during the waiting period while approvals are being made. The only difference here is, in this case, I have an algorithm for approved or rejected, and basically it's a voting system, and I'm using custom responses. And the custom responses I'm using are allocated and no budget. So basically the algorithm I have, I think I mentioned it last week, is that if two people say allocated, if three people are doing it and two people say allocated and one said budget, it's approved. So it's majority wins. If the allocated is greater than or equal to the no budget, then it's approved, because we can pass this money around, not a problem. All right. Now you can tell that this workflow process is completed because the red is at approved, and you can see what everybody said. You can even see their comments. So they've been told they can make small comments. Maybe they need to let you know what cost center to charge, or whatever they need to say. They can say that in a short text field when they do the approval, which is the common approval field. I'm just showing it here on the app like this. Now I'm going to go to one that's not finished yet. So this one's rejected, and this one's rejected because two people said no budget. So again, the majority wins. So the outcome that I determined was rejected. So when you get the outcome in Flow, what it will say, like for this one, would be no budget, comma, allocated, comma, no budget. So it kind of gives you each of the answers in what they call an outcome in the API. So what I did was I created my own algorithm against that API so that I could decide whether it's rejected or approved. because I wanted only one answer for an outcome. And then look at the pending one here. So in this case, we know that there's 3 people involved in the process, but can you tell who has not responded to their approval request yet? Nestor. He has a habit of doing that. So Nestor might need a little help. Maybe he needs his manager to explain that we need you to approve on time, not 6 weeks later. Or Nestor might be on a different assignment and he can't approve. So let's go ahead and reassign his, right? Or in this case, because we already have 2 allocated, guess what? The majority is already 1. We don't even need Nestor. So you can see that it can be advantageous to know what's happening behind that wait, because it can help you make decisions faster, help people where they need it, and get things out of the way that might be holding up the show. All right. So how did I do this? All right, let me show you. I'm going to start by showing you the information architecture. So at first I did a parent list and a child list. And this is where every form got a parent item and then every response got a child item. But I figured, parent-child relationships in SharePoint, some people might find that really hard. So let me see if I can simplify. So I simplified it. And of course, you can do this any way you want. I'm sure there's 15 ways to do this. But in this case, I'm using one list, and you can tell what the master list item is. So the list item that has the names of the approvers in the approvers list field, that's like the master. This is created as soon as the form is submit. And the workflow is going to create an approval in CDS, and it's going to recognize the first approver in that whose card is made, whose request is made. And so I put that in the owner ID. These fields are helpful when you're in Flow and you need to compare things, or you need to make sure you have the right list item. So I go ahead and share some of my CDS data in SharePoint. It helps me to make relationships and create new solutions that combine them both. Okay, now this row, as you can see on the right, maybe not so well here, has 2 approvers, Isaiah and Maud. Now Isaiah said allocated on this day at that time, and he gave this response, right? And so if you look back at the app, this is items 26. That is this one here. And so what's really cool about this is the app actually makes it easier, because you don't need to figure out what the parent is. It puts it right here. And then when you click here, you get the details for that item. Now, sometimes I do notice a little latency, which you saw with 26, and I think it's just you can just refresh it or clear your cache. It happens sometimes with PowerApps. But it should clear up itself, right? So sometimes you'll see a little bit of slowness where it's updating these fields, but it will kick in and it will be fine. If you ever notice slowness, try clearing your cache. All right, so now I go back to my list, and you can see that each line that has the approver names, that's the line that came from the form. That's the initial creation. And then however many number of people that are in the approval list, there's one record for each of them. And so you can see there are 4 rows with the approvers list. And so in the app, the first gallery has 4 rows. But again, if you click on one, then you get to see all the approvers in that list item, and no matter how many it is. That one has 3. That one has 3. And this one only has 2. All right, so no matter how many list items it is, it's going to adjust itself to be the right size. All right, so that's all that is. All right, so let's close this up. I'm also going to clear my cache a little bit because I did notice a little bit of stuff there. And so now I'm going to show you the Power App, how it's built. So I'm going to just close out of here and open it in edit mode. Okay, so you'll notice that the first gallery on the first page is just that list, because this is going to be such a simple app in that it only has one connection, and that's the one list in SharePoint. So no lookups, no parent-child relationships, just a simple list. But then on this list, what I'm doing, because I showed you the list itself, I'm only getting the items that have no person in the approver column. And that's just how I'm distinguishing it. I could also do that the length of the approval list is greater than 1, right? So anything you can to pull these parent lines into PowerApps. And so after I pull the parent lines in, now when I go to the next page, here's where the very simple magic occurs. These are just text boxes, and all they are returning is what has been selected in that first gallery on the home screen, which is Gallery Submissions 1. So here I wanted the ID, but I have it prefixed by ID. Here I wanted the requested by name, but I have that prefixed by requested by, and I wanted the course name just prefixed by the word course. So you guys know that, super easy. Now you have several elements on this page, and I do notice you may have to increase the thickness of your lines. I had them at 2, and what happens is that they literally seem to disappear sometimes. So let's try put them at 3, and you'll see them all. They're just rectangles, and I made them really skinny rectangles. And then the one inside the gallery. So there's 3 rectangles on the screen. 1 inside the gallery and 2 at the top. And so you want to make them same so they look so you see it looks better now. So I think when it's too thin, it's a hard time drawing it on the screen. So make it at least 3 points, and then you can see the line. But that's just simply a line. I'm not doing anything fancy. It's just that there's a line on top where start is, a line on the bottom, and then the first gallery item has that rectangle in it. And all I do to make the height of it is set the height to the template height. And then I think I added a couple of points to it just to make sure that this line overlaps the other 2. And then I added 2 circles. So there's a circle on the inside and a circle on the outside. And so in most cases, I actually say inner circle, outer circle. You should rename these things. I was being kind of lazy because I was trying to get it done quickly. But the inner circle is the one that carries the color, and it has logic, of course. So if we look at the fill of this inner circle, right, it basically says if the response is approved or rejected, then that should be red, because it means it's finished and it has a outcome. Otherwise, it should be gray, which means we haven't finished the workflow yet, and that's what's going on here. Same thing for the word pending. Basically, if we have no response, which means the outcome, then this should be just pending. So the word pending. But if we do have a response, let's go ahead and give the response there. Start is always start. And I think it's inner circle. Let's find that inner circle. You should label your stuff, you know? I don't know why I didn't. So the inner circle of start, let's find it here. It's not that one. I think it's status. No, that's the one that I named. So I did name the inner circle in the gallery. And basically, let me show you the fill of that since we're here. The fill of that is basically if the text inside of response, so this response label is named HTML text 1 response. If that text is blank, which means they haven't answered yet, then make it light gray. Otherwise, make it this blue. And since they have responded, they said allocated, it's blue. Okay, I'm leaving this on the screen so you could pause and you could write down the formula, but super easy. I was going to this circle over here. Oh, it's in a group, that's why. So inner circle, let's look at the fill of that. This one basically, if the label at the end, so it's based on the pending on the bottom, if that's pending, then make it red, otherwise make it gray. And what this does, this color and line situation here, is it changes. So this is rejected. So it's not at start, it's finished. So I move the red to the finished location. But if it's not finished, if it's still going, then I make the red at the top because it's not yet finished. It's just started, right? Okay, next. So this guy is a lookup. Now, you don't have to use lookups. You could actually create a collection, but I like to use lookup. If I don't have a lot, understand that lookups can be intensive in the amount of calls that you're making for each lookup. But I got 3 to 4 things on this page. I'll just go ahead and do a lookup. You could definitely do a collection that does all your lookups in the beginning and then just reference that collection as well. But you can see the lookup. This is what I wanted to make sure you knew how to look up the value. And so it's right there at the top. Basically, you're saying that we're the approval ID, and this is part of the reasons why I have the approval ID in there. Because what the approval ID does, let's go in there, is it connects the ones that are related. So if you notice, it's a many to one scenario, but there are every one that's related to this approval or that submission has the same approval ID. So it helps me keep these things together no matter how many people are involved. And let's go back to the app. And then behind there is just an image that I've grayed out because I like the rounded borders, and I don't think we can round borders on a rectangle. And so I just put an image back there, and I blanked out the image and filled it in gray. And that made my bubble for me. And then this is a text box on top of it for the comments. And I used an HTML text box so that it would wrap well because it's maybe a rich text field in SharePoint. So I'll use an HTML text control in that case. And basically that's it. Oh, so you'll notice that when you switch screens, the pending or the approved will move up or down depending on how many items there are. I don't have anybody with 4, but you can see it moving up and down. It's never sitting in the inside of the gallery. So how do you do that? That's just moving the Y. So in a couple of ways you could do this as well. So don't think that my way is the only way. But for the Y, I counted the rows of the gallery, and then I times it by some fixed number, which to me is the space of each row. And then I added the Y of the gallery just to make sure it never sat on top. But you can fiddle with these numbers. This is just about math. So basically what you're trying to do is put this beneath the gallery no matter how tall the gallery is. And you do the same thing with your circles over there. And that's the whole thing with the app. That's how simple the app is. So the app was really easy. Now the flow, let's go look at the flow. So first let's close our app, save and publish our app because it's ready to go. People can start using it right away. If we share it, right? So let's go look at the flow. Alrighty here. So we have this flow, and yes, I have a lot of variables. And I kind of was thinking maybe I should put my variables in a scope as well. So variables should be at the top of your workflow if you're going to use them, and or as soon as possible after what they depend on. So the reason why the scope for the approvers is stuck in the middle before the count recipients is because this has to run before this variable really can get anything. And I don't need to really set that variable. I can default it at the number of recipients for the approval. So I will come back to these, but these are optional, which means Let me tell you the most common reason why I use variables is because there's a property that will disappear on me. So I'm in my dynamic tags and I'm moving through the flow from apply to each and from scope to scope. And I want something to stick and be available to me all the time. I will very often use a variable to keep it available to me no matter where I go. And so in this case, this is a variable holding the emails. It's not defaulted to anything to start. This is a variable holding the count of votes for allocated. It starts at 0. This one is the variable that counts the votes for no budget. It starts at 0. This is the thing that holds the approval ID, which I get when I create the approval. And so it doesn't have a starting thing. And then this is the parent row. This is just so I can teach my flow where to update the final approval, that outcome. Remember I told you I'm counting and then I'm getting an outcome. Next, I'm preparing a list of approvals. And so I'm actually using the group from the teams. So we work in the teams in this particular scenario, and there are about 10 people in there. But whatever I top this to, that's how many people will be involved in the approval. It's up to me to top it to whatever I want. Right now, I can just use these 3 people and we're good. But if one of them were to leave, it would automatically replace, that person with the next person in the group. So I'm just using this group, but I have to list the group members first. Then after I list them, I iterate through their names and get their email and append their email to the approval emails. And what I end up with is a variable called approval emails with everybody's email address followed by a semicolon. Notice the semicolon at the end. Okay, now I've done that. And the next thing I'm going to do is count the recipients. And I don't know why I was doing this. Oh, this is just counting the recipients. So how many people came out of here to make sure it was 3? I don't think this is necessary. Sometimes I'll throw variables in there because I'm testing along the way. And then there's the variable of what the course is. And this one, I know for a fact, I kept losing it as I was going down my flow. And so I set it in a variable so that it would always be available to me. And here is where I actually create the approvals and the log. So anytime you're using a form, you have to get the details before you can do anything else, right? Because you want to get the details of what was in the form, right? Because otherwise you just get the ID. Then I'm going to add the user profile so that I can get more than forms gives me. So forms gives me the email of the person who submitted the form, but I might want his full name or his manager's name or whatever. So this is a habit I have. I literally keep this situation handy, and I love that I can put it on my clipboard and use it, as long as I don't close my session. And, I just remember to use this a lot. Whenever I want more about a person, I can just put their email in there and I can use that whenever I want. It's one of those default things that I do. But it had to live after get response details because that was the first place that you had somebody's email that I could use. Then I created a SharePoint list item, and this is that parent item. The item that just basically starts the whole thing, kicks it all off. It puts a record on SharePoint that the process is started. And then it keeps a copy of that course name. So this is where we're setting the variable of course to the answer in the form, which course. And then you create the approvals. And now in the approvals, I'm using that variable for the emails because I'm sending everybody the same approval. Now on this point, what I want to say to you is that this might be easier for some of you if you had a in parallel branch where you sent to all 3 people through parallel branch, each person getting their own approval ID. Then you wouldn't have to look up the IDs and you could just submit everybody's approval, and you wouldn't need to worry about how to get it updated. In this case, for this log, I had to do a little bit more work because I only wanted one approval. If you go the other way, you've got to have 3 other approvals and 3 waits. Now, those of you that are wondering why I didn't use create and wait, it's because I want to do things between the time it's created and the time it starts waiting. So I want to be able to log progress. I also want to be able to, right here, I think what I'm doing is adding the approval ID to the existing item that I created a few minutes ago, because I didn't have the approval ID till I got this. But now that log is complete and ready. Now, when I say wait here, like I said to you before, normally Flow will just go to sleep right here and wait for everybody to report that what their vote is or their approval response is, and then it kicks back in. By the way, what I didn't show you in this approval is that I'm using custom responses, and I've chosen wait for all responses. And the 2 responses that I typed in here are allocated and no budget. Please note, you can type any number of responses you want. It doesn't have to be 2 buttons. It could be 20 buttons. Unfortunately, in my mind, it could be 40, but you can do as many buttons as you want. All right, and I did 2. Okay, and then that's what they'll see in their approval card. They'll see that. All right, so now I'm waiting, and then after it finishes all the votes, then I count, right? So I look at my responses and I say if the response is equal to allocated, we're going to count that as positive, and we're going to increment our allocated variable by 1. Otherwise, we're going to increment our variable item, no budget, by 1. And this will give me 2 variables with the count of each response. I grabbed the current time because now I'm going to log into the master of each submission. I'm going to log the outcome that I decided. In other words, if the allocation is greater than or equal to no budget, then it's approved. Otherwise, it's rejected. That's my decision. So I counted the outcome in order to make my own outcome. Now, that's all this flow is, no big thing. But let me show you how we're getting Flow to tell us about what's happening in the wait. So I'm doing 2 things for that. One, I'm actually getting a flow here that feels when CDS gets hit with a new request. So as soon as CDS gets hit with a new request, then what I do here is I look at the items in the SharePoint, and I say where approval ID equals the approval that's here. And actually the thing that's missing here is I should have, well, you don't need anything in this case. I think it's in the other one. But this is gonna look for a match, and if it has a match, then it will update the list item with the owner ID. And this is updating the master list item with an owner ID of the first owner that responds. And the reason I want that there is because I'll need it to compare, right? And you'll see that when you do this, that this third flow actually is collecting all the responses. But in order for you to collect those responses, you need to be able to compare your not only your approval ID, because there's 3 of them for every submission, but you also need the owner ID. So the purpose of this, now I can compare in my list, and I'm just going to show you that here. This record. So let me just open this all up. All right. So first I'm saying whenever a record is updated where the approval value is changing, then what we want to do is I wait a minute. And the reason I wait a minute is because if the other flow takes a little bit of time to work, it won't have an owner ID. And so I kind of wait. until it has an owner ID, which usually takes less than a minute, but I just kind of make sure that it has an owner ID. And then I initialize my variable for user email, which I don't think I actually need in here. And then, oh yes, I do. I need it later, so you'll see where. Okay, so then I get my items from SharePoint, and I'm looking for where the approval ID matches the approval. And then I get my users also, because you only have IDs in the approval request and the approval response. So by having the user entity, I can now get other things like their address, their name, their phone number, things like that. And what I've chosen to get is their primary email. And that's what I'm going to use for the user's email. So I set that right there. And now I can create an item for each person who approves. And basically I just collect the title, create it, and request it by, because I already have that. But then, and you could not change it if you want to keep it the same, that's fine. And then I use that user email. This is the person who's approving. And then I fill in from the trigger when it was created, which is the request date, when it was modified, what response they gave, what comments they gave, the ID, and the owner. And so that finishes everything. And what that does is each of these lines that belong to one person, that's making that line, right? So that's why these lines also have approval ID and owner ID. So I'm sure I'm updating the right line. Now, I'm sure you could get away with doing less, but this is my way of making sure the data integrity is maintained. So I hope that makes sense. And if you have questions, it'd be best if you post them on the community, but you can post them below. It's just that if you post them on the community, what will happen is more people are likely to see them, and you won't be waiting on my attention. So I really enjoyed doing this because this gave me a chance to do quite a few things, to get into like logging flows, which I wanted to practice my own kind of logging, because at any time you can log anything you want in the way that you want to log it, and you will get the results exactly what you need. And basically, I reverse engineered this app. So I said, this is the app I want, and I reverse engineered the information architecture so that it would support the app. And so I hope this was enjoyable to you. I look forward to talking to you soon. Let me know the next thing you want me to talk about. I have planned to talk about more about using JSON, but if you want something else, let me know. It was nice talking to you, and I'll be seeing you soon.